Events happen that change our lives. Dealing with change is what we do. We discuss with industry professionals objective solutions to work through cherished items and family memories. When we go beyond the gavel, we provide tools and information to deal with these crisis times. Welcome, I am Shane Feely, owner of Auction Solutions, Inc. In my 20 years of auction action, I have encountered hundreds of families who are facing the loss of a loved one. They may have lost their business, they may be going through a divorce, or have had a catastrophic event in their family which changed their life. The common thread I hear frequently is that we know we have to do this, but we don't know why. We've talked to the court, we've talked to a social worker, we've talked to someone who's giving us orders, and we don't know why we're doing these things. Today we'll go beyond the auction with my guest, Brad Boyum, attorney at law, and he specializes in estate planning and estate administration. Bradley, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you coming out here. Many times I walk into a family home and address the family members, and there's sometimes a family dynamic going on, there's other things going on, there's a lot of grief and a lot of loss, and a lot of times they're still in tears and they're in a big hurry. They want answers and they want to act right away. They're dealing with all of these things, and Brad, what do you suggest someone do as just a homeowner and a property owner, and to plan ahead a little bit to help your family through these terrific, terrible times?
Well, I mean, just to touch on a point you brought up, that yes, a lot of people they get in a hurry, they just want to know what's going to happen, and that's understandable, but most of the stuff that happens after someone passes away is not urgent. It can be postponed or not started until, more important things are taken care of, such as, the grief process, getting through the planning on the funeral or any services associated with that. As far as the planning prior to someone passing away, the best thing to do is obviously have a written estate plan that lays a lot of that stuff out. So it names the person that you want to handle your estate when you pass away, which is in Nebraska is called the personal representative. That speeds things a lot in the court. When you have a will, you don't have to have a hearing to name that person. The court will just sign the order authorizing someone to sell or transfer property.
So if I might ask you, what is the difference between power of attorney and a personal rep?
So power of attorney is a document that is drafted and is used while someone is alive. And so you are authorizing someone to act on your behalf while you're alive, but you are unable to make your own decision. So it may be a permanent situation, where you have dementia or something like that, or it may be temporary where you're unconscious because of surgery or things like that. So there's generally two types of power of attorney, or two main uses. So what I would call financial, but is really everything but healthcare decisions. So a financial power of attorney and then a healthcare power of attorney. Those are the two most common powers of attorney.
I see. So if I am helping someone pay the bills, would you suggest they put me on their bank account, or do you have another suggestion for that to protect the rest of the family members or heirs?
I always advise against putting people on their bank account as what the bank will call joint owners or joint tenancy. What happens when let's say your mom puts you on her bank account to help pay the bills. Mom passes away, at that point legally that child generally is 100% owner of that bank account. So if there's other siblings, a lot of times a fight will ensue because the sibling who was on the bank account pockets the money and doesn't want to split it with mom and dad or with their other siblings. So I get a lot of comments like, well, the will says to split everything equally, and then I'll have to have a conversation saying, I understand that, but because the beneficiary form was filled out in such a way or your sibling was listed as joint owner, the will has no power over that.
So if you are on the bank account and you are the recipient of that and nobody else is, what would happen if you were named in stocks, bonds, other types of assets? Would that also come into play the same way?
Yes, so an account that holds securities or stocks, will also have a beneficiary attached to that. So If you were the joint owner of that, it happens the same way. If you're the beneficiary, it transfers at death. But if you're listed as the joint owner on, say, a TD Ameritrade account or something, it would happen the exact same way as the bank account.
So how would you suggest someone, let's talk about estate planning a little bit here. How would you suggest, where would I start besides hiring a professional?
Well, how I tell people to start or to look at it is, from the start, the first meeting that we have, we kind of work backwards. So I talk to them about how they want their estate to end up. And obviously the conversation that I have with them, we bring up a lot of hypothetical situations. What do you want to happen if you and your spouse pass away simultaneously? How do you want that to be handled? If you have minor children, that needs to be addressed as far as the guardians, but also a minor child can't take possession of money, especially in large quantities. So how do you want the money to be handled? So the conversation is really working backwards from how you want it to end up if something were to happen to you in the age that you are now. So
I see. So I've come to you and I have all of my paperwork in order and I've signed off and I know what everyone is supposed to get. What do I talk to my kids? Most people are pretty secretive about their finances and they don't really want to talk about that.
Yeah. That is very common. People don't want to bring their children into their financial world, I guess if you want to call it that. Mothers tend to be a little better about that than fathers. So, and fathers the males or husbands tend to die first. So after the husband has passed away, mom brings in the kids, or at least one of the kids, to help with managing money or paying bills or anything that goes along with that, looking for a smaller place to live, anything like that. So that is a problem. People don't know what their parents have, and in the electronic age it's getting harder because mail is becoming less common. So you used to be able to just go through someone's mail and find bank statements and things along those lines, whereas now a lot of that stuff is emailed. So if you can't get into their email, you run into other problems. So.
Oh, sure. So hopefully they've given someone in the family their email passwords.
Yeah.
And please don't put it on Facebook, right?
Exactly. So, but yes, or educating whoever you have named in fiduciary positions in your will, such as the power of attorney, in the power of attorney document, or the personal representative in your will, letting them know that you've named them is helpful for a couple of reasons. One, they don't want to be shocked if and when something happens to you, but they may not want to do it either, so you've just named someone who does not want that responsibility. And also with children, they may move, so if they're no longer in town, it's a lot of times easier to have someone who's a little closer. It's not the end of the world if the personal representative is not in town. But.
Is that power of attorney going to help if your loved one becomes hospitalized, for example, a catastrophic accident or something? Is that going to come into play at that point?
Yes, so the healthcare power of attorney would come into play if someone is unable to make their own decisions. And so generally spouses will name each other as first in line, and then if kids are old enough, one of the children or a couple of the children are named as second in line to make decisions. So if it's a catastrophic accident, and even if it's temporary, and the doctors know it's temporary, someone has to make decisions for you. So that person makes the decisions, along with if it's a permanent situation, such as Alzheimer's or dementia is the most common one now, where people need help making decisions for the rest
What
of their lives.
about people who, it's kind of trend now not to be married? What about in a case like that, if you're not married, are there blood relatives that all of a sudden have more rights than the person who's been living with someone?
Yes, that's true. On the decision making, if there's nothing written, such as a power of attorney or a will, the way the laws are set up is it's just based on, they have to name someone, so they base it on how closely someone else is related. So the closer you're related, so if parents are still alive, they would be first in line. Siblings or kids are next in line. And then they just look for someone who's willing and able to do it, and as close a relation as possible. So if there's a partner that you've been with, for 15, 20 years, and with no legal arrangement, there's basically no rights that person has.
So that could be bad for somebody, couldn't it?
It's bad on the decision-making front. It's tough on the estate front. So if you don't have a written estate plan and that person would, if that person is thought of as your spouse, but not legally your spouse, then the inheritance would go to someone else unless it's written down somewhere.
Oh my. What about after someone has passed? A lot of times the family all gathers at the home, the family home, and all of a sudden things come up missing. What do you kind of advise to keep that safeguarded so that it's all there where it's supposed to be?
Well, this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning on not rushing. So I tell people to take your time, and a little bit of that is making sure that the house can be secured. And this is where you and I have got to know each other, is the house aspect and the items in the house, I guess. But the securing the assets is a problem, an issue, partly because one of the jobs of the personal representative, if not the main job, is to gather and secure the assets of the estate. And so some of the assets are in the house. Some of the assets are easier to secure, like bank accounts, but you definitely don't want people taking items out of the house right away without it being an organized fashion. So,
Sure.
And a written estate plan helps with that. Whether there's specific items in the will that are distributed to someone, personal property generally, or what's called a personal property memorandum, which is an ancillary document to the will that is just a list of, whether it's a family china or jewels or guns or anything like that, that's a personal item that doesn't necessarily have a title and goes to someone.
So you were talking briefly earlier, what is the biggest mistake people can make?
Well, the biggest mistake is not having a plan. So that one is still very common, and even I would say if your will is very old, say 30 or 40 years old, that will is still valid, but it doesn't really do anything you need it to do. Your life has changed so much at that point in time that the will isn't
Right.
effective other than to name a personal representative.
You may have added properties, you may have a vacation home, you may have RVs, hunting lodge, something
Yeah.
like that.
So
All
one
that
of-
needs to be accounted for?
Exactly. So one of the triggering events for people to get a will is when they first have children. So I see a lot of grown kids, their parents show up and there's a will from when the child was just born.
Oh,
So the general pattern of someone's life as far as their estate planning, have kids, so you name guardians for minor kids in your will. As the kids get older, they slowly age out of needing a guardian, then they're capable of actually receiving money, and then at some point they're old enough or mature enough to step into those positions of those decision-making positions like power of attorney or so that's kind of the progression of someone's estate plan as the children age.
sure.
So when you have an old will when the children were just born, it just doesn't.
it's not going to carry the weight that it needs to,
No.
especially if you only have one named, correct?
Well, yeah, that happens a
they'll
lot.
get it, that would be bad.
The first child is named, and then there's no more children. But there's 3 kids.
What about
but-
us?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I bet that probably instigates hurt feelings.
Yeah.
What else after the first mistake? So you have done a plan, and they're getting ready. Do you keep a copy of that will in your office?
I do. So I have electronic copies of everything. The will doesn't get emailed too much, but the power of attorney documents will get mailed to or emailed to the bankers or anyone that would need that sort of stuff, whether it's your investment advisor or bank. The will, people will store it themselves a lot still. Otherwise, they're still filed down at the county clerk's office or the court's office, so they can store it for you too.
So how could I find out? Go to the county clerk's office and just ask them at the desk, or pay $12 or $1 a page, or
For the will?
for a copy of the will that I,
Oh, I mean
or a search, or
yeah, so if you just call down there, so if someone calls me and their mother has died and they can't find the will, my first call is to whatever county they were living in, calling the court and asking if the will is there.
okay, so
They'll just do it over the phone.
oh, that's nice.
If it's not there, then they either don't have one or we need to find one. So,
Start finding it in the house, and everybody hides places in a different
Exactly,
area of the
yeah,
house.
yeah.
We find some trends as we go through,
Behind the
where,
fridge, yeah.
yeah, behind the fridge, mom in her house coat, things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Diamond rings, like, oh, there it is right there, and the
Yeah.
family had been looking for it for quite some time. When they designate, and the will is old, so they've designated that someone is to have this and each item. What do you do in those cases?
In those cases, it's if they still have the item, then it goes to that person. So whether it's, like I said, a china or jewelry is very common. Some people will have collections of things, whether it's stamps or Hummels, I guess, are something that used to be much more valuable. Yeah. Guns are a big one around here. So things like that would just be distributed to that person who's ever listed. So the memorandum is literally just an ongoing list of personal property items, basically items in your house that don't have a title and who it goes to. So.
Well, years ago they used to do a videotape, and I bequeath this and to each. Are those valid?
I mean, I'm sure there's a way you could make them valid. The laws surrounding proving the validity of a will, even a written will, don't match up very well with just someone being videotaped and not having any facts surrounding that situation on how they did it or if they were being forced to do it or anything like that. So.
Because I had a friend who used to take a video camera and make sure that everything in the home was on the video. And I don't know if anybody does that anymore.
Yeah,
but
well, on personal property, they would have an easier time using that than if they actually sat down and said, this is what I want my will to be on video camera. But going through and saying, I want this antique table to go to so-and-so, that's a little easier to use it for something like that.
So is it takes time to plan who gets what or what to do with your estate. Is it cost effective to do that? I know that everybody's afraid of attorney fees, but it's something that needs to be done, and especially in this litigious age where people don't agree about a lot of things. How would you compare the cost of that? It's not like buying an Escalade, and depending on the attorney, I'm sure you go to, but for just a person coming in off the street, is it? Give me a comparable.
Well, for me personally, as far as how I charge for estate planning on, for a will for a couple or something like that, everything is flat fee. So they know at the end of the first meeting what, whether it's a will or a living trust package, things like that. So they know what the price is at that first meeting. So the plan may get more expensive depending on how complex someone's situation is, like second marriages, and you each have your own set of children, things like that. So as the plan gets more complex, obviously the price goes up, and that's generally where trusts come into play as well too. So.
Sure. We had a family deliver 5 semi-loads of belongings, and when it came down to it, there were 1,300 heirs, 5 generations, and it was a really interesting auction that we had. We did it all online, and they were all allowed to bid and buy their items. But I mean, liquidation of assets is always a little complicated, but I think if you're prepared going into it.
Yeah, and so as far as the personal property, the people get a little overwhelmed with the thought of having to list out who gets everything, and that's really not what it is. It's a relatively short list. It's not everything in your house. It's the things that you either want passed down or have been passed down. The problem or the trick with those lists is people don't necessarily know what they want until that emotion strikes them, until they actually lose someone, and then there's an emotion attached to some item that they now want to keep that, and it's really just a reason to remember someone. So there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago about a woman who hated her mother's china pattern, and so of course after her mother died, she now collects this china pattern because it's a reason to remember her mother. So she has 30 place settings now or whatever it is. But items like my dad's dad, my grandfather, I have a shoe shine box. So it's not worth that much financially, but I used to see him shining his shoes all the time. So that's what I remember of him. But I have like my great uncle, my conference table in my office is my great uncle's old conference table. So things like that. And you wouldn't, even 10 years ago, if my dad would have asked me if I wanted a conference table, I would have said, why would I want a conference table? So, but now I'm in a situation where I want, it's kind of nice to have a relative's conference table.
So if we back up just a little bit, once you've had that loss of someone in your family, what is the first thing as an heir or one of the family members that we need to remember?
Well, I mean, the first thing is the important part is to grieve or to deal with the loss of someone. You don't need to add to the stress by thinking about administering the estate on top of it right away. Obviously, there's some things that need to be handled that are estate related, like the funeral arrangements or service arrangements, things like that. So that brings up money right away, which unfortunately obviously leads into the estate planning side of things with oftentimes life insurance is what ends up paying for the funeral, so you wind up right in the middle of dealing with the estate administration during the funeral
process. That makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have your funeral, and then just maybe take a little time to gather your thoughts and do a little research, because sometimes people have reverse mortgages. They might have some debt on a house that you didn't know about, or they might have a lien on a car, or it's a lease car. And before you divvy it all up, you really need to do a little research, don't you?
Exactly, and that's part of the issue we brought up earlier with the email versus mail. So you may have some trouble finding some of that stuff. So, and part of the probate process once someone dies is there's a notice put in the paper that the creditors have to come forward. So you use the court system to get those people to come forward, and they have their own systems to monitor if there's a court case opening on someone that's a client of theirs, or someone that has a loan with them. So there are some valid or good reasons to go through the probate process. That being one of them is that it forces people to come forward. If they don't, then they can't come back. They can't show up 5 years later and ask to be paid for a credit card.
So if I'm a personal rep and I am now going to be an executrix, how does that process work?
So if there's a will, there'll be a personal representative named in there or nominated in there. If that person still wants to do it, if they hire me, they will be the person applying to open the probate case. And so the application and the will go into the court, and the person who is the personal representative will sign a few extra documents accepting that role. And then if there's no one objecting to anything, which generally there isn't when there's a will, the court will just issue what they call letters of personal representative, which is the court order naming someone or authorizing someone to act. And those generally will come out 7 working days or business days after filing. So you don't ever go to court on that.
Oh, okay.
And then once you get those letters, then you have full authority to act as the decedent would have acted.
So then you can make those calls on the behalf of your loved one, and you can find out if there's a loan on the house. And they make copies and send them in. I know I've done short sales before, so I know they require a lot of documentation for that. If I go to an attorney and hire Brad Boyum to handle my estate, what is that going to do for me?
Well, the main thing is it takes that worry or that burden off of your shoulders and puts it in someone's hands who is well versed or set up to handle something like that. The court system for probate isn't necessarily like you'd see on TV where it's adversarial and there's people arguing back and forth, but it's still nerve-wracking to people because you get notifications from the court, and now with email you'll get emails from the court for a hearing notice or a notice that something that needs to be filed, and so it's nerve-wracking to people getting something from a court when you don't know exactly what it is. So that's the big thing, but most people don't go through the probate process, or if they do, it's one time with a parent or something like that. So just the unknown aspects of it takes up a lot of time if someone tries to figure it out on their own, and a lot of times they're unable to finish it correctly. So Nebraska is also one of the states that has a state-level inheritance tax or death tax, so they get the added joy of that. So.
I'm sure that can be a surprise for families too, the estate tax. Well, Brad, I really appreciate you coming out here today. It's also good to see you again and to be working with you again. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming to watch this show today and turning us on and watching it all the way through. We are beyond the auction, and we are going to continue to go beyond the auction and find out what makes families work better when they suffer a loss of a loved one.